Hello there. Today we'll be doing a recap of a 2002 American erratic thriller film titled Unfaithful. This is a pretty interesting one, so grab yourself some popcorn and sit back. You're gonna enjoy this. As the movie begins, we see the Summers, a family of three. Edward the father, Connie the mother, and their 8-year-old son, Charlie. This family lives in a pretty big house, and it looks like they have a perfect life as they are a loving and financially free family. They had pretty normal lives, but all that changed when Connie met a young man named Paul. So it's all stormy. Connie is out and right opposite, and walking directly in her direction is a man in his 20s named Paul. Is carrying a huge pile of books, and coupled with the fact that the wind is a bit aggressive, Paul can't see what is in front of him, even Connie. Both of them bump into each other. All of Paul's books are scattered on the floor, enough to get him frustrated, but he instead tries to get a taxi that will take Connie home. But unfortunately, he is not able to. He then goes back to chit-chat with her, and he notices that their collision made her bruise her legs. He then asks her to join him in this apartment that is actually just a few blocks away so he can help her treat the leg. She agrees, and when she gets to his apartment, she sees books everywhere. That's where she learns that he is a book dealer. After treating the injury, Paul offers her tea, but she isn't in the mood for any of that or any more formalities. She instead asks for his phone, and she calls her son, Charlie. Right as she's on the boy with her son, she feels Paul touch her legs with wet clothes, of course for the bruises. This gesture puts her off, as that type of intimacy is too unexpected and sudden. Although she is stunned, she does not do anything about it. She probably felt that was just a one-time thing because there was no reason why she would see Paul again. After the call with Charlie, she tells Paul that the person she was on expects Paul to lose any interest or hope that he has, now that he knows that she is married and already has a child. But I'm sure you already know that this did not work on Paul. As she's about to leave, Paul convinces her to take one of the books home. She picks one, also randomly opens a page and reads the content out loud. Paula joins her in reciting it, and she leaves. Getting back home, she meets her husband, Edward. She tells him about Paul and how he helped. Edward jokingly asks if he's good looking and if they should send him a bottle of wine to appreciate him. The next day, while reading the book, a small piece of paper falls from it. It is Paul's business card containing his phone number. She calls Paul to appreciate him for the previous day, and Paul invites her to his place again. Although she is a bit reluctant at first, she agrees to join him there. Getting to the apartment, she meets a prepared Paul. Paul has a mission already, and that is to make as much skin-to-skin contact as possible. First, he tries to take off her coat as she enters. In doing so, he let his fingers run around her neck, hoping he sends a sensation down her spine. But that wasn't his only attempt. He also tells her to close her eyes as he takes her hand and rubs it on a book with a weird surface. They both laugh at how the book feels, and even after she opens her eyes and they laugh, and it looks like the whole game is over, Paul still does not let go of her hand. In fact, he essentially tightens his grip. She realizes what is going on, and she politely leaves. As she leaves, she heads to Edward's office. As they get there, she sees him talking with a colleague, Bill. As Bob leaves, she hugs her husband very tightly, like a couple that just got married. She also gives him a new sweater as a gift. Edward then asks her about how her day went. She tells him that she has been busy with an auction she's preparing for. Edward makes another joke like the one he made the day Connie met Paul. Edward asks her who she hit on, and she also jokingly the couple joke about this and head back home after Edward is done for the day. Back at home, Edward notices that Connie is a bit absent-minded while doing the dishes. Although he notices this, he does not say or do anything about it. The next day, we see Connie in Paul's house, but this time they aren't reading books or treating bruises. We see them dancing together. As they are dancing, Connie asks Paul some personal questions. This makes the whole atmosphere more unique, and both of them slowly get more into it. But just as they are about to kiss, Connie breaks out of whatever was over her, and she tells Paul that she needs to leave and coming here. Dancing with him was a mistake. Paul says the obvious, it isn't a mistake, but she knows it is, as she is a married woman who loves her husband very much, and she leaves. But she then realizes that she forgot her coat, and she comes back for it. Paul is not going to let another opportunity slip, and he immediately sweeps her off her feet. She instantly falls into his charm. Maybe it's his strong arms, or she actually loves him. What matters is, as he picks her up, she does not object, and she wraps her arms around him like it is something she always wanted. He takes her to his bed, and well, I don't think I need to tell you what happened next. Later, we see her on her way back home, overwhelmed by guilt. She thinks about what just happened between her and Paul, and she feels bad for betraying her husband, but then she lets out a smile. That tells us that she actually enjoyed it, and there's at least a shade of excitement. The next day, Edward comes across Bob Gaylord. Based on what Connie told him, Edward thinks that Connie and Bob Gaylord are working on the auction together. And remember when Connie joked about hitting on Bob Gaylord, Edward jokingly tells Bob Gaylord to watch out for his wife, but Bob Gaylord is confused. He does not know why Edward made that statement. That's where Edward learns that Connie and Bob Gaylord didn't meet up to work on the auction. To make matters worse, Bob Gaylord has been out of town and only just returned. Edward now knows something is up, but of course it's mild, at least for now. So although he has suspicions, it's not enough for him to act on or even talk about. Connie, on the other hand, has found a new source of happiness. The duo becomes unbreakable as they continue exploring different ways to level up their sex life. Connie is now obsessed with Paul and vice versa. One time they meet up in a restaurant and are not even ashamed to get intimate in such a public. But unknown to Connie, Bill, her husband's friend and colleague, is present and he sees everything. Connie really enjoys her time with Paul, and now all she wants to do is always return to him anytime she leaves. At this point, she's not interested in any form of sexual relationship between her and her husband, as she consistently turns down all his advances. Edward's suspicion only grows more. One day, she tells Edward that she has an appointment in the saloon, and a few hours after she leaves, Edward calls the saloon to confirm if she actually shows up, but when they tell him that she didn't, his suspicion hits the roof. That same day, on her way to Paul's apartment, she meets some friends, Sally and Tracy. They convince her to accompany them to a restaurant so they can catch up. Not long after they get to the restaurant, Connie calls Paul to tell him that she'll come late, basically her updating him on her movements. But in no time, Paul shows up and heads straight to the restroom. Connie joins him there and they make love as usual. After that session, Connie goes back to sit with her friends, and Paul also comes out minutes after and stays by the counter. Sally sees him and tells her woman that she does not mind sleeping with him. Tracy immediately cautioned her, reminding her that she was a married woman and should not consider anything like that. Tracy then shares a personal experience, making it clear that the worst decision she ever made was cheating on her husband. Connie hears all these and figures it's best she also ends her relationship with Paul. The next time Connie and Paul meet, she suggests they're breaking up. Paul shrugs it off, telling her that he'll be shattered if they break up. One day, Edward and Bill have an argument. Edward claims that Bill is not loyal to the company and he fires Bill. Bill claims that he has a family and Edward takes a jab at Bill's family. This hurts Bill, and before he leaves, he tells Edward to properly examine his own family. This only makes Edward's suspicion worse and forces him to hire a private detective. He leaves for Chicago the next day for business, and the private detective gets to work. He follows Connie and Paul around and takes their pictures. Edwards returns the next day and the detective meets him with the pictures. Edward now knows exactly what is going on. Connie, on the other hand, is not happy with herself, especially after listening to Tracy. One day, she is driving and tensed. She then sees Paul happily running off with another lady. She angrily follows them and fights Paul when she catches up. Paul takes her to his apartment, where she angrily ends the relationship. But as she leaves, Paul stops her, forcefully kisses her, and in the end, they make love aggressively. But this time, Edward watches them from outside. When they are done, Connie storms off aggressively and does not even notice her husband outside. As she leaves, Edward goes inside and introduces himself to Paul as Connie's husband. He asks Paul some personal questions. He then sees Paul's bed looking rough. He then sees a snow globe that he got for Connie. This gets him really mad, and he hits Paul with the snow globe a few times, and by the time he comes back to himself, Paul is already dead. He covers the body and puts it in his car. That night, he properly disposes the body. The next day, the police arrive at Summers' residence to question Connie about Paul's whereabouts, as she was the last person he called before he was reported missing by this family. Connie has no idea Paul has a family, and she feels betrayed, but she tells the cops that she wanted to sell some books to Paul, and there is nothing more, and the cops leave. But the next day, the cops return with the bad news. Paul has been found but dead. Connie acts like she isn't moved by this, and this only raises the cops' suspicion, and they start asking her questions, but Edward properly handles the situation. The next day, Connie is doing the laundry, and she sees pictures of her and Paul in Edward's pocket. She already knows her affair is no longer a secret, secret. We then see the Summers having dinner with some friends in their residence, and Connie suddenly spots the snow globe back in their house. She looks at Edward, and he also stares at her. From this, Connie knows her husband knows something about Paul's death. After the guests leave, the couple argue, and Edward tells her that he wanted to kill her and not Connie. Realizing her husband is a murderer, cries and leaves the room. The next morning, they act like there's no problem and they make peace. Edward suggests that he turn himself in to the police, but Connie is against that. She tells him that they will get through it together. Later that night, we see them in their car, Connie, Edward, and their son. Connie tells Edward that they should change their names, move to Mexico, and start a new life. Edward seems to agree, but as the camera zooms out, we see that they are parked right outside a police station, and the movie comes to an end here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.